They didn't scream me out of the family, they just rewrote it without me. One day, the group chat stopped buzzing. My name vanished from the bank documents. The Christmas invitation never arrived. It wasn't rage that followed, it was the echo of absence. My son and his wife called it streamlining. I called it erasure. But I didn't argue. I watched. I waited. And when they booked the family beach house for the summer reunion, the one my late husband and I built shell by shell, they didn't know I was already listed as the new owner. I didn't need revenge. I just needed a key. So I gave them a warm welcome to a house that remembered me even when they chose to forget. This isn't a story about getting even. It's about being undeniable, quietly. For every mother who's been rewritten, this is for you. The email didn't come, neither did the call, but the silence. Oh, the silence made its presence known in the smallest ways. No, Mom, did you get the itinerary? No, we're thinking of making peach cobbler again, just like Dad used to like. It was the week before the family's annual summer retreat at the beach house, a tradition I had started with my late husband nearly 3 decades ago, and I had been edited out of it like a typo in a group photo caption. I found out the same way I always do now, by accident. Or maybe it wasn't an accident anymore. I logged into my bank account to transfer some money for groceries and saw an error message. Access revoked by primary account holder. Primary? That had been me since Michael died. I blinked, refreshed, and the message remained. A call to the bank left me on hold for 48 minutes before a representative gently, apologetically informed me that Andrew, my son, had moved all joint accounts into a family trust, one I was no longer listed on. "Just for protection, Mrs. Reeves," she said, "standard for aging clients to prevent exploitation." I thanked her calmly, hung up, then sat for 5 full minutes without moving. Aging clients, exploitation. My own child had decided I was a risk. Or maybe Danielle had. She'd always talked like a lifestyle blog post, smiling with her teeth and her eyes separately. A few hours later, scrolling Instagram more out of habit than hope, I saw the photos. A mood board Danielle had posted. "Reeves family summer 2025 as tradition not grateful." There was the beach house, our beach house. But now it had a new name. Reeves Coastal Escape. The caption mentioned exclusive rental and invited family only. I wasn't tagged. Of course I wasn't. I closed the app, poured a glass of water, and walked out to the balcony of my Santa Monica apartment. The air smelled like salt and eucalyptus, but it couldn't mask the ache. They had cut me out, not with knives, but with edits, policies, and permissions. I was no longer the matriarch. I was the footnote they didn't want to cite. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I expected tears, a clenched jaw, something. But instead, I cleaned, not angrily, methodically. I wiped the kitchen counter, refolded the towels, sorted a drawer I hadn't opened in 3 years. It's what I do when I'm trying not to unravel. I organize what's left. That night, I took out an old wooden box Michael had carved for me. Inside, layered between faded birthday cards and ribbon-tied letters, was the deed to the beach house. Original print. His signature. My name. Co-owner. That house was more than a property. It was our legacy. I remembered Michael's voice the day we closed on it, holding my hand, saying, "We don't build this for us. We build this so our family always has a place to return." But the family we built had redrawn the blueprint. The next morning, I called the old real estate agent who had handled the property all those years ago. She answered on the second ring, cheerful and crisp. "Margaret? Oh, it's been ages." I asked a simple question. "Is our beach house listed for sale?" She went quiet. A breath, then a slow, careful, "Well, technically, yes. But it's listed under a corporate shell, most likely a family trust reorganization. Nothing malicious, just restructuring." Restructuring, a word people use when they want to sound professional while removing you from your own life. I thanked her, asked for the listing link, and hung up. Clicking the link was like peeking into someone else's photo album. The listing called it a charming generational property, now available for a fresh legacy. Photos of the porch swing I painted, the shell chandelier Michael made with our son when he was 9, even the blue-tiled backsplash I insisted on installing myself, called Quaint Artisan Touch. I scrolled past price and agent details down to the fine print, and there it was. Seller is motivated due to estate transition. Estate transition. They weren't just erasing me, they were rewriting history while I was still alive. But as I sat staring at the screen, something strange happened. I didn't feel rage. I felt precision. The kind of clarity that only comes when you've been underestimated one too many times. I closed the laptop and reached for the drawer where I kept my father's old fountain pen. It still worked. The ink flowed like memory. You don't fight fire with fire. You fight fire with paperwork, signatures, and timing. And I knew exactly where to start. I made 3 calls. The first was to a woman named Grace Holloway, my college roommate turned estate attorney. We hadn't spoken in 4 years, but when she answered, her voice still had that dry wit tucked beneath the professionalism. "If this is about your will, I already told you don't leave me the cat." "It's not about the cat," I said. "It's about something more living than that." She listened, quietly. Then she asked for documents, everything I had, the deed, the trust, the new listing. "Email them tonight," she said. "If they play dirty, we'll use the mud." The second call was to a local tax office near the beach house. I posed as a curious buyer. "Is the property up to date on taxes?" The woman on the phone, unaware she was speaking to a co-owner, replied, "Actually, no. It's flagged for delinquency, 2 quarters behind." She sounded bored, like this was routine. But to me, it was gold. The third call was the hardest. I dialed Andrew's number with no plan to speak, just to hear the voicemail. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe a sign of guilt, but his voice was warm, polished, practiced. "Hi, you've reached Andrew Reeves. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." Beep. I hung up. The pieces were starting to align. Grace called me back later that evening. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "The trust your husband set up had a fallback clause. If any of the stipulations were violated, like tax delinquency or non-disclosure, you have the right to reclaim full ownership through a quiet title process." I blinked. "So, I can take it back?" "If you want it," she said. "It's already yours." They broke the terms. There was silence between us. Good silence. Grace then added, "Maggie, they didn't just forget you. They tried to erase you from your own legacy. That house is your proof that you were never gone." I looked at the turquoise box on my shelf, the one Michael had kept seashells in for decades. Inside was a letter he wrote me once, long before he got sick. I never opened it. It was marked, "Only if you feel like you've disappeared." I hadn't opened it then. I didn't open it now. Not yet. Instead, I opened a clean folder on my desktop, created a new title, Operation Homecoming. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel erased. I felt inevitable. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was clarity, pure electric clarity. Every memory that had been dulled by years of silence now returned in vivid color. Michael hammering the mailbox post while Andrew chased crabs barefoot. Me painting the shutters coral pink because everyone said it was too bold. It was our history, mine, and they had tried to whitewash it like it never mattered. I spent the next day assembling everything. Grace sent over legal templates. I printed documents, highlighted sections of the original trust, flagged inconsistencies in the financial transfers Andrew had made. Every line I read felt like reclaiming a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Then I went one step further. I booked a room. Not just any room, the master suite of the beach house. Through the third-party booking portal Andrew had set up under the LLC, pretending it was a luxury rental. He thought he was clever, renaming the property Reeves Coastal Escape to obscure the family tie. But they hadn't removed the booking access. I reserved 3 nights, Friday to Sunday. Guest name Margaret R. Holloway. I borrowed Grace's last name just in case. Under special requests, I wrote, "Champagne chilled on arrival. Cotton sheets only. Privacy required." 2 days later, I received the confirmation email. Payment processed. Room reserved. That weekend, I packed not with bitterness, but with precision. 2 dresses, one navy, one white, low heels, a manila folder with every document Grace and I had prepared, and the unopened letter from Michael. I flew to Georgia quietly, rented a sedan, drove 2 streets past the beach house before parking under the shade of an old magnolia. I arrived early, not to be seen, but to see, to feel the air of the place before it was filled with people who had decided I no longer mattered. The house looked smaller, or maybe I had grown. The porch swing still leaned slightly left. The wind chimes were gone, likely replaced by something curated and modern, but the door still creaked the same way. The ocean still whispered with that deep hush like it was listening. I didn't stay long inside, just long enough to leave the documents on the nightstand, open the curtains, and check that the champagne was on ice. Then I left, locked the door behind me, and waited in the car. Not for drama, just for timing. Because the one thing about being erased is they never expect you to reappear right at the center of the story they rewrote. They arrived late Friday afternoon, exactly as expected. Andrew first, stepping out of his silver SUV like he owned not just the house, but the ocean that brushed its edge. Danielle followed in a flowing maxi dress that probably cost more than the flight I took. Her smile was wide, eyes hidden behind sunglasses too large for her face. Behind them, 2 nieces I hadn't seen in 2 years, tumbled out with noise and sunscreen-stained backpacks. Danielle barked cheerful orders. Andrew carried 1 bag, then 2, then stopped, confused. The lock beeped red, not green. I watched from my rented car across the street, hidden behind tinted glass and a newspaper I didn't read. Andrew tried the code again, red. He stepped back, checked his phone, frowned. Danielle approached the keypad herself, her voice rising slightly in pitch. He said it would be reset to the family code. Red again. Then came the twist of confusion. The front desk. Because now the house was part of a rental system, every booking had to check in through the local management company. They walked across the street to the small desk housed inside an airy seaside shop. I could see the exchange even if I couldn't hear the words. The clerk flipped through a guest log, shook her head gently. I imagined her voice. "I'm sorry, I don't have your names on the reservation. The only party listed is Miss Margaret R. Holloway." Danielle blinked. Andrew's mouth twitched. The kids stopped moving. The silence that followed wasn't explosive. It was surgical. Then the clerk tilted her head, pointing toward the house with polite concern. They turned in unison, eyes narrowing toward the porch. I stepped out of the car. My shoes clicked against the pavement as I crossed the street. I didn't rush, didn't speak. I just walked up to the front steps and paused, watching their faces freeze in slow realization. Andrew's mouth opened first. "Mom?" Danielle stiffened. "What are you doing here?" I smiled gently, checking in. Danielle's eyes narrowed. "Under a fake name?" I held up the key card. "Under my ownership. The title transferred 2 weeks ago." The clerk behind them adjusted her posture, clearly realizing who I was now. Andrew stepped forward, that familiar frustration bubbling. "You're kidding, you bought the house?" I looked past him, toward the porch swing. "No, I reclaimed it." Danielle's composure cracked first. Not dramatically, but with that subtle tremble around the jaw that only someone who's built their life on control would understand. Andrew, on the other hand, straightened like someone preparing for a boardroom confrontation. "You had no right," he said, his voice clipped. "This wasn't meant for you." I turned to face him fully. "I wasn't meant to find out, you mean?" He opened his mouth again, but I cut in. "You registered the property under a shell LLC, changed the access codes, moved the title into a trust I was never informed of, and then you listed it, publicly, for profit. It's a family asset," Danielle snapped. "We're streamlining responsibilities. You've been distant." Distant. I repeated softly, like it was a new word I was tasting. Not invited, not consulted, Not warned. That's not distance, Danielle, that's design. The clerk shifted behind the desk, clearly uncomfortable. Would you like me to— No, I said calmly. These are my guests, but they're not listed on my reservation. I handed her the papers Grace had prepared. This outlines my legal ownership, title, clause activation, proof of lapse. She read the first page, eyebrows arching slowly. Understood. I'll update the registry. Danielle stepped forward, voice low and sharp. What is your end game here, Maggie? Humiliation? Are you hoping for some kind of dramatic family redemption arc? No, I said, stepping onto the porch. I want silence, and maybe a glass of wine. They didn't follow, not yet. I heard their whispers as I stepped inside. The door clicked behind me, and with it came a stillness that filled the entire house. It wasn't just about winning. It was about remembering this space as something sacred. A place I had painted, swept, cried in, laughed in. A place where Michael had once slow danced with me under a leaky porch light during a rainstorm. This wasn't vengeance. This was restoration. I poured myself a glass from the bottle I had requested and stood at the front window. Outside, they were still standing there, confused, calculating, unraveling. Let them. Let them decide whether to retreat quietly or storm in without a key. Either way, I had changed the locks, not just to the house, but to the story. By nightfall, they were gone. Not permanently. Just retreated to a rental down the coast one Danielle must have scrambled to find with Wi-Fi and attitude. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. People like them don't leave the battlefield until they've rewritten the terms of surrender. But that night, the house was mine again. I walked room by room, letting my fingers graze familiar textures, the rough edge of the fireplace stone we never fully sealed, the dent in the hallway where Andrew once knocked over a lamp during a tantrum, the faded outline on the guest room wall where Michael hung the seashell frame we made in our first year here. In the office, the old file cabinet remained. I knelt, tugged open the bottom drawer, and found it, right where I remembered. The wind chime. Seashells and blue string, faded and tangled, but intact. I cradled it in my palm for a long time before setting it on the desk. That's when I opened the letter, the one Michael left. Only open if you feel like you've disappeared. His handwriting had thinned in the final years, but the words were still solid. Maggie, if they ever forget who you are, remind them who made the place they're standing in. You didn't just build walls and floors. You built memory, and no one, not even blood, gets to unwrite that. You're not invisible. You're the foundation. I cried then, quietly. Not because I was broken, but because I was whole, in a way they'd tried so hard to fracture. The next morning, a local news van showed up. I saw it through the front window. Blue logo, a man with a microphone rehearsing his lines. Danielle's work, no doubt. Her fingerprints were all over this, turning a private matter into a public circus. She didn't get her way, so she reached for her greatest weapon, narrative. My phone lit up within minutes, a voicemail from an old neighbor. Saw something about you in the beach house on the news. Call me if it's true? Another from the church ladies group. You okay, honey? Do you really own it now? Wasn't it Andrew's? And just like that, my silence was weaponized against me. I didn't panic. I printed everything. Trust clauses, dates, signatures, even Michael's letter. Then I called the only reporter I trusted, someone who once covered elder abuse and inheritance fraud. I sent her the full packet with a single line attached. This is the real story. Share it only if truth still matters more than spin. The article dropped less than 24 hours later, not on the front page, not even above the fold, but tucked quietly into the Sunday edition under a section called Voices You Haven't Heard. The headline read, Legacy Lost and Found, One Woman's Legal Path Back to the Home Her Family Tried to Forget. It wasn't sensational. It was surgical. It detailed the trust clause, the unpaid taxes, the sudden shift in ownership under Andrew's LLC, my exclusion, my legal right to reclaim. It quoted Michael's letter, not all of it, just the line about memory being stronger than blood when truth is buried. The story didn't go viral, but it didn't have to. It reached the right inboxes. By mid-morning, Danielle had taken down her Instagram posts about Reeves' coastal escape. The website listing the beach house as a premium rental vanished without fanfare. The group chat Andrew used to coordinate family events suddenly went quiet. And then, the phone rang. Not a number I recognized, just unknown caller. I answered. It was Andrew. His voice wasn't angry, it was restrained, measured. "We'd like to talk." I let the silence sit. "You've made your point," he added. I took a breath. "Andrew, I didn't make a point. I protected a promise." Pause. "I didn't know Dad's letter existed," he admitted. "I thought he—" "Thought what? That he'd forget? That I would?" He sighed, softer now. "Can we come inside? Talk?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I gave an address. The legal office Grace worked at. "If you want to talk, do it where truth is required." Later that week, we met. Grace sat at the head of the table, calm as a glacier. Danielle wore gray, her power color dulled. Andrew came alone. No lawyer, no theatrics. They offered a deal, a partial buyout, public apology in the family circle, control of future use. I declined. Instead, I offered them a clause of my own. They could return to the beach house, once a year, as guests, invitation only. The look in Danielle's eyes was thunderless, cold, restrained. Andrew nodded slowly. "You still want us to be part of this?" he asked. I looked him in the eye. "No, but your daughters deserve to remember where they came from, even if their parents forgot." I stood, gathering my folder, the wind chime sketch tucked inside. I didn't slam doors. I didn't offer hugs. Some stories aren't closed with forgiveness. They're closed with clarity. The house was silent again, but this time it felt like peace, not exile. I returned after the meeting, barefoot on the warm porch, the scent of salt and honeysuckle in the air. The kind of evening that used to hold laughter, clinking glasses, children running from the tide. It wasn't that I didn't miss those things. I just stopped pretending I was the one who let them go. I poured a glass of red wine and settled into the swing that still leaned left. The wood creaked in a rhythm I knew by heart. As I watched the sun dissolve into the sea, I finally understood something I hadn't let myself admit for years. Being quiet had a cost. Not the kind you notice immediately, but the kind that accumulates. Little moments chipped away, when you hold your tongue at Thanksgiving to keep the peace, when you smile through exclusion, when you say, "I understand," just to avoid another raised eyebrow. Every time I stayed quiet, I traded truth for harmony. But harmony that requires erasure is just silence, dressed in politeness. I thought about the first time I noticed Danielle's tone shift. It was subtle, a backhanded compliment at a birthday party. "Maggie's always been so independent. She doesn't really need family around, does she?" I laughed then, because I thought it was easier. I didn't realize I was giving her permission to redraw my role. Then came the decisions made without me. The passwords changed, the holiday emails I was never copied on. Andrew never confronted me. He just quietly let go of our tether, thread by thread, and I let him. I let them. Until the day the house reminded me I was still here. It wasn't about the title or the property. It was about the memory embedded in every brick. It was about knowing I had mattered. Not because they acknowledged it, but because I never stopped showing up in my own quiet way. That night, I dug through a box in the hallway closet and found an old Polaroid. Michael, Andrew, and me, standing on the porch the summer we finished building the back deck. Andrew couldn't have been older than 10. His arms were slung around both our waists. We were laughing. I taped it to the fridge, not for nostalgia, for proof. Proof that I was there, that I had always been there, even if they'd stopped looking. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, small feet pounding up the porch steps. I peered through the front window and saw them. My granddaughters, Ella and Sophie, each holding a canvas tote bag and matching sun hats. No parents in sight. I opened the door slowly. "Girls?" Ella grinned. "Dad dropped us off and said we could stay for the morning, said you'd be okay with it." Danielle's fingerprints weren't on this. This was Andrew, a quiet white flag wrapped in little sandals and sunscreen. I stepped aside and let them in. "Shoes off. You know the rule." They giggled, sliding out of their sandals as if nothing had happened, as if this were just another beach day. And for the next 2 hours, it was. We made lemonade, dug out old coloring books. I let them climb up to the attic, where we found the seashell memory jars Michael used to label by year. Beach 2005, Thanksgiving 2011, last swim with Dad. Sophie turned one over in her hand, eyes wide. "You kept all of these?" I nodded. "Everyone." They asked questions. Not about the article or the house drama, but about why the jars mattered. Why their grandfather wrote dates on shells. Why he collected things everyone else saw as disposable. I told them, because someday someone will try to rewrite what happened, and little things like this help you remember the truth. At noon, Andrew returned. No words, just stood at the foot of the steps with that familiar, unsure stance of a man who once thought he knew better. The girls waved, ran to him. Ella whispered something into his ear. His shoulders lowered, and he looked up at me. "I didn't realize you saved all of it," he said. "I didn't do it for you." He nodded. "I know. That's why it means more." There was a pause between us. Thick, but not hostile. He stepped closer. "They want to come again, if you'll let them." I studied his face. He looked older, not in years, just in weight, like something finally cracked behind the perfectly composed exterior. "You can drop them off every Saturday morning," I said, "but the house rules stay. No code changes, no rental listings, no erasure." He swallowed hard. "Agreed." As he left, I caught Danielle watching from the car. She didn't wave, just adjusted her sunglasses and stared forward like a woman watching a narrative she could no longer control. For the first time in years, I didn't feel outnumbered. I felt anchored, and I wasn't leaving. Later that evening, I found myself pulling out the old wind chime from the office drawer. Seashells on faded blue string, tangled beyond recognition. It had once hung on the back porch right outside the kitchen window. Michael and I had made it the summer after Andrew was born. Each shell represented something, a promise, a memory, a season we thought would last forever. I sat cross-legged on the floor and began untangling. There was something meditative in the motion. Loop, pull, release. It felt like sorting through time itself, undoing years of silence, twist by twist. I didn't fix it to make it pretty. I fixed it because some things don't have to be perfect to still matter. The girls' laughter still echoed faintly from earlier in the day. Their tiny footprints remained on the hallway tiles, like evidence of life continuing. New chapters blooming on the same worn page, and that night I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the open kitchen window. The sea breeze crept in gently. I hung the wind chime where it used to belong. It caught the air slowly, like it was remembering how to dance. It made no dramatic sound, just a faint click of shell to shell. But that sound was enough. I could feel something shift in me, something heavier than anger, deeper than relief, a kind of grief for the years I'd let go quietly, but also a calm that came from knowing I'd finally stopped waiting for someone else to make space for me. This house had seen everything: joy, loss, betrayal, return, and now it would witness healing. I got up and walked through the house one more time. I didn't check locks or windows. I didn't make lists or retighten picture frames. I just touched what mattered: the edge of Michael's old recliner, the railing he built himself, the threshold of the guest room door where Andrew lost his first tooth. Every corner held a story that I refused to let vanish. As I turned off the lights, I didn't feel like I was closing a chapter. I felt like I was opening one that wasn't curated, cropped, or cut down to fit someone else's comfort. This time it was my voice, my pace, my version, and I knew exactly where to begin. 2 days later, the doorbell rang at dusk. No call ahead, no text. Just the soft, unmistakable chime echoing through the entryway. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. It was my sister. Laura stood with a hesitant smile and a tote bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the house behind me like she was peering into a ghost. We hadn't spoken properly in years, not since Michael's funeral, when she'd said, "You've always been so private, Maggie," like it was a fault that explained everything. "I heard about the article," she said. I leaned against the doorframe. And I thought maybe it was time I stopped pretending we didn't have unfinished things between us. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, like someone stepping into a memory. Her fingers grazed the edge of the hallway console. Smells the same, salt and lemon and wood polish. We sat in the kitchen, 2 mugs between us, silence hanging like a fragile thread. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of old letters, yellowed, bent at the corners. She slid them across the table. "I found these last week, in Mom's attic. Letters you sent after Michael died. Birthday cards. Updates. You wrote every year, Maggie." I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "None of them were answered." "I know," she said, voice trembling. "And I'm sorry. I didn't know what Danielle and Andrew were doing. I thought you just needed space." "Space was never the issue," I said. "Being erased was." She blinked, then whispered, "I didn't erase you." "No," I agreed, "but you didn't fight it either." A pause, a long one. Then she reached over and touched my hand. "I'm here now." And strangely, I believed her. We didn't fix everything that night, but we started, slowly, with stories, laughter we hadn't shared in a decade. She remembered the wind chime, asked about the garden path Michael once promised to finish. We spoke like women rebuilding a bridge with no blueprint, just memory and regret. Later, as she left, she paused at the front door. "Do you think next summer we could all come back, try again?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "On my terms." She nodded. "That's fair." As the door closed behind her, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, not vindication, but something warmer, belonging. And this time, it was mine to extend, or protect. The attic smelled like cedar and dust, a mix of time and storage. I hadn't been up here since before Michael passed, and even then it was only to chase down a leaky pipe that had threatened to stain the guest room ceiling. But now I climbed the narrow stairs with purpose. The boxes were still there, dozens of them, labeled in Michael's handwriting. Taxes 002, 007, craft, kids, M's tools, and then one near the back marked simply, Maggie. My breath caught. It wasn't my box, not something I'd ever packed, yet the tape was old, the label faded. Proof it had sat untouched for years. I dragged it forward and knelt beside it, heart thudding with a strange mix of dread and hope. Inside, I found letters. Hundreds. Some were mine, drafts I never sent, pages of emotion I wrote and folded and then couldn't bring myself to mail. Others were from Michael, journals really, never addressed but filled with his handwriting. July 8th, Maggie asked again about the deed. I hate keeping this from her, but Andrew swears it's just temporary. I don't trust the lawyer. I should have pushed harder. September 21st, Danielle said Maggie doesn't need to be included in the group text. I regret letting her take the lead. Maggie's always been the spine of this place, not just the memory. November 10th, I miss how she used to laugh in this house. The quiet here without her feels like punishment, but I don't know how to fix it without blowing it all up. My hands shook. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Not yet. Each page was a window into a man caught between loyalty and guilt. A father who tried to protect but didn't realize silence was a wound too. At the bottom of the box was a smaller envelope, my name on it, in Michael's firm, slanted print. I opened it with care. Maggie, if you ever read this, it means I didn't get to fix things while I still could. I'm sorry. I let others convince me you were okay without this house, without us. But deep down, I knew better. You are the one who always made things last. This place was always yours, even when you weren't in it. Don't let them take that from you. Not again. I held the letter to my chest, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, even by someone who was no longer here. I spent the rest of that night surrounded by paper ghosts. The attic floor grew cold beneath me, but I barely noticed. Every letter, every journal entry from Michael stitched a new thread back into the fabric of who I was, who we were, before silence wedged its way into our story. I found notes about Andrew as a boy, about his temper, his ambition, his need to be the fixer. Michael worried he'd one day try to fix things that weren't broken, like people. There were passages about Danielle, too. Sharp clinical observations masked in love. Danielle sees Maggie as a threat to her order. She dresses it up as concern, but she wants control. And control doesn't have space for Maggie's kind of steady. One entry, scribbled in the margin of a tax document, stood out. I made Maggie promise once that she'd never shrink herself to keep the peace. I hope she remembers that now. And I did. I remembered it in every page I turned. Every sealed envelope never mailed, every apology never spoken aloud but written in the curve of his tired pen. Downstairs, the wind had picked up. The seashell chime tapped gently against the glass, like it was reminding me the ocean still moved, even when no one watched. I finally climbed down, arms full of what no court ruling could ever grant, evidence of love that had never vanished, only buried. The next day, I made copies, one set for me, one for the lawyer, and one I left on the old desk in a folder labeled for when they ask. Because someday they would. Danielle, Andrew, even Laura. They would come back, not with lawsuits or interviews, but with questions. Questions their daughters would ask. Questions no silence could answer. And when that time came, I didn't want to fight. I wanted to show them. I wanted them to see what Michael saw, what I had almost forgotten. That history is not rewritten by the loudest voice, but by the most enduring truth. So I closed the folder gently, and I whispered to the room, "We're not done yet." 3 days later, Sophie came back. No fanfare, no entourage, just her and a backpack with a keychain shaped like a jellyfish. "Dad said I could come help you clean the porch," she said, already kicking off her shoes. I blinked, surprised. "You want to clean?" She shrugged. "He said you might tell me stories while we work." So we swept, dusted, pulled cobwebs from corners where time had settled like smoke. And as we worked, I told her about the summers her father spent chasing frogs down the garden path, the time he broke the front step trying to impress a girl with his skateboard, how Michael once strung fairy lights across the porch and declared it Maggie's Cafe. Sophie smiled, wide and unguarded. "I think it's still your cafe." And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not just connection, but understanding. She didn't need every detail. She just needed to feel rooted. After lunch, she wandered into the office, pulled open the drawer, and found the folder labeled for when they ask. I moved to stop her, but paused. She looked up. "Can I read some?" I nodded. She flipped through slowly, her little fingers tracing Michael's handwriting. Then she looked at me and asked, "Why did they leave you out?" The question hit with a kind of quiet thunder, but I didn't flinch. "Sometimes," I said, "people think they're protecting what's theirs, and in doing so, they forget who helped build it in the first place." "Did it hurt?" she whispered. I kneeled down beside her. "Yes, but I didn't let it stop me." She folded one letter and held it close. "I'm glad you didn't disappear." So was I. That evening, when Andrew arrived to pick her up, he lingered on the porch. His eyes flicked to the new paint, the swept steps, the chime swaying gently. "She's been asking a lot," he said. "She's allowed to." He hesitated, then reached into his jacket and handed me something, a folded paper. I recognized it instantly. Michael's handwriting again. "I found this in a book he gave me before he passed. I didn't read it then. I didn't think it was mine to read, but maybe it's yours now." I took it, hands steady. Inside was a single sentence. "Give her the space to speak. She's carried silence long enough." Andrew looked me in the eye. "I'm sorry it took this long." I didn't say I forgave him, but I did say, "You're here now." And sometimes that's enough to begin again. That night I didn't sleep, not because of unease or grief. Those ghosts had long learned to wait their turn, but because the wind outside wouldn't settle and the house felt like it was holding its breath. I sat in the living room with Michael's final note resting on my lap. "Give her the space to speak." I whispered it aloud, as if saying the words could make them truer. Then I opened the drawer in the hallway where we kept the old voice recorder. It still worked. A little battered, the buttons sticky with time, but when I clicked it on, a red light blinked steady. I began to speak. Not to anyone in particular, but to the ones who never asked. To Andrew, who didn't know that silence from a mother isn't absence, it's exhaustion. To Danielle, who mistook control for contribution. To Laura, who waited too long to speak. To Michael, who tried to build peace and ended up papering over a crack that needed light. I spoke about birthdays forgotten, invitations unsent, gifts returned unopened. I spoke about the nights I wept quietly into Michael's old flannel shirt, praying I wouldn't disappear completely from the story I helped build. I spoke until my voice cracked. Then I clicked save. Later, I burned a copy to a USB and placed it inside the same folder where the letters lived, for when they ask, because I knew the story would circle back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but one day, a descendant, a granddaughter, a curious nephew would ask why Aunt Maggie's name was missing from the family tree for nearly a decade, and I wanted them to hear the truth in my own voice. The next morning, I hung the wind chime out front, right where it belonged, catching the light in slivers. I wasn't waiting to be heard anymore. I had spoken, and the house, our house, finally felt like it exhaled. The next Saturday, I woke up to the smell of pancakes. Not just the boxed kind, real buttermilk, browned edges, and the faintest hint of vanilla, the kind Michael used to make on stormy mornings. I followed the scent, half dreaming, down the stairs. Ella stood barefoot in the kitchen, wearing one of my old aprons knotted 3 times around her waist. Sophie sat at the table, already halfway through her second helping. "I found the recipe card," Ella said, grinning. "It was in the cookie tin with the missing lid." "You two made this?" I asked, stunned. "We wanted to surprise you," Sophie added. "We even made coffee the old-fashioned way, not with Dad's machine." They beamed with pride, and I felt something rise in my chest, a mixture of déjà vu and tenderness, the kind that comes when memory sneaks in gently, not with pain, but with peace. We ate together at the sunlit table, the sea breeze drifting through the open windows. Midway through breakfast, Ella asked, "Grandma, why didn't they invite you all those years?" It wasn't a trick question. Just a child trying to make sense of grown-up failings. I set my fork down. Sometimes people are afraid of what doesn't fit their version of the story, and instead of learning, they edit. "Did it hurt?" Sophie asked again, that familiar refrain. I nodded. "Yes, but what hurts doesn't have to ruin us. It can remind us what matters." They were quiet after that. Later, we moved to the porch and painted seashells. Sophie held one up. "This one's for the wind chime. Can we add it?" I smiled. "Yes, let's make a new one. Together." And we did. String by string, we built something beautiful out of the broken. A chime that blended old shells with new colors, memories layered like paint. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. When Andrew arrived to pick them up, he paused as he saw the new chime dancing above the steps. "They love being here," he said. "It feels like something shifting." "It is," I said simply. Then he hesitated, reached into his bag, and handed me a manila envelope. "Danielle sent this. She wants to talk." I raised an eyebrow. She said she's ready to listen. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I looked up at the chime, our chime, and thought about what it meant to truly be heard. "I'll think about it," I said, because listening doesn't begin with words. It begins with trust, and that takes time. I didn't open the envelope right away. I placed it on the kitchen counter, next to the jar of paintbrushes still dripping from the morning's art session. The house felt alive now. Footsteps echoing softly on wooden floors, laughter tucked into corners, chimes whispering with each gust of wind. And yet that envelope sat heavy, like a shadow waiting for permission to re-enter the light. By sunset, I moved it to the office. It stayed unopened. Instead, I found myself drawn to the hallway closet, the one where Michael used to stash everything he swore he'd fix someday. Behind a broken lamp and a box of tangled extension cords was a shoebox marked M. Wills. Not legal documents, Michael never labeled that obviously, but memory wills. Little time capsules he made during chemo, filled with things he wanted to pass along. Inside, handwritten notes on index cards. Some addressed to Andrew, some to the girls. A few simply said, "For later." One, in faint pencil, read, "For Maggie. If you forget your worth, read this again." I unfolded it. "You built this family even when they stopped calling it yours. You showed up. When others flinched, you steadied. When I slipped, you didn't pull me back. You braced yourself and let me lean. That's not fragility. That's strength with a quiet name." I didn't cry. I smiled, because for once, I wasn't remembering through someone else's filter. I was remembering as myself. I went back to the envelope and finally opened it. Danielle's handwriting was sharp, neat, unyielding, but the words were different. "Margaret, I was wrong, not just once, but for a long time. I let fear dictate what family should look like. I thought control meant safety, but your silence spoke louder than I expected, and your steadiness, well, it reminded me why this house still stands. If you're willing, I'd like to come by. Not to make amends with words, but to show you I can learn. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope there's room for understanding. Danielle." I folded the letter carefully, then picked up the voice recorder. I clicked record. "Danielle, if you're listening to this, I want you to know I heard you. Truly. And I'm not here to punish you. I just need to know this isn't a performance. So if you come with truth. Come without armor." I paused, then added, "Come as someone who's finally ready to remember the full story." Then I saved it. Not to erase the past, but to give it a future. Danielle arrived on a Wednesday, alone. No makeup, no designer handbag, no echo of superiority trailing behind her heels. Just a woman holding a pie, store-bought, still in the plastic, and eyes that looked like they hadn't rested in weeks. "I wasn't sure what to bring," she said. "I know you don't eat much sugar anymore." I nodded once, taking the pie gently from her hands. "Michael liked lemon. You remembered." "I did," she said quietly, stepping over the threshold like it was sacred ground. The kitchen held its breath as she looked around. "You haven't changed much," she said, scanning the room. "Even the little chip on the teacup by the sink. It's still here." "Some things don't need fixing," I said. She smiled, a little sad. "I used to think you left to make a point, that you wanted distance." "I never left," I said calmly. "I was edited out." The words hung there, undeniable, simple, surgical. Danielle nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believed what was easier, that you were fine, that you didn't need us, that you preferred it that way." "I preferred not to be forgotten," I replied. She sat down slowly at the table. Her hands trembled slightly, like every movement was both confession and plea. "I read the letters," she said. "Andrew shared them, and the audio file." I didn't speak. She continued. "You deserved better. You showed up even after we shut the door, and when we tried to reopen it, we wanted you to smile and pretend it had never been closed." I sat across from her, steady. "I can't rewrite what happened," she said, "but I'm here now, if there's room." I looked toward the porch where the new wind chime spun quietly in the dusk light. "There's room," I said, "but not for pretending, not for curated apologies." "No more performance," she promised, "only presence." We sat like that for a long while. two women with history laid bare between them. Not mended, not smoothed, but acknowledged. And sometimes that's the seed of healing. When she stood to leave, she paused in the doorway. "Will you come to dinner next week?" she asked. "All of us, no agendas, no photo ops, just us." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Ask me again next week." She nodded, understanding, because forgiveness, like trust, isn't gifted, it's earned. The next few days passed with a stillness I hadn't felt in years. Not the cold silence of exile, but the warm quiet that follows a long-awaited breath. The house seemed lighter. Even the floorboards creaked softer, as if they too had been waiting for something to shift. I spent my mornings walking the garden path Michael once planned, but never completed. I didn't plant anything. I just walked, hands in pockets, letting the soil remember the weight of me. Then one evening, as the sun curled low into the sea, Andrew returned. This time, he didn't park out front. He walked from down the road, slowly, shoulders heavy, hands empty. When he reached the porch, he didn't knock. He sat. "Do you remember when Dad taught me to paint the shutters?" he asked. I nodded, remaining by the door. "He let you choose the color. You hated it." "I hated that you didn't ask." He chuckled, more regret than humor. He said you were always the color in the house, that the rest of us just tried not to mess it up. I sat beside him, the air between us filled with twilight and the sound of the wind chime, now with Sophie's painted shell dangling from its string. "I didn't mean to shut you out," he said. "But I didn't stop it either. And maybe that's worse." "It wasn't just you," I replied, "but you led the silence." He nodded, jaw tight. "And I'm trying to unlearn that." There was a long pause. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A photo, faded, sun-streaked. The last Christmas we spent together before everything unraveled. I was laughing, holding a mug. Michael had his arm around me. Andrew stood behind us, half smiling, still a boy trying to be a man too fast. "I found this behind one of Dad's books," he said. "I thought he threw it out." "He never threw pictures away," I whispered. "He just put them where only he could find them." Andrew turned the photo over. On the back, Michael had written, "The ones who stayed, even when they weren't seen." He placed it gently on the porch railing. "I don't expect a clean slate," he said, "but I'd like to start sketching again, even if it's messy." I looked at the photo, then at the sky, and finally at my brother. "Messy is honest," I said. "It's a better start than silence." We sat until the stars showed up, quiet, imperfect, and full of old light. And for the first time in years, we didn't feel like strangers holding history. We felt like family, trying again. The invitation came on a cream-colored card. No digital RSVP, no emoji-laced group text, just paper, ink, and a date. Handwritten in Danielle's careful script. "We'd like to host dinner at the beach house. All of us. No expectations, just presents." I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't believe them, but because part of me still lived in the ache of the years before, where doorways were closed, not with slams, but with silence. But then I looked at the house, our house, and remembered the voices that now filled it again, Sophie's stories, Ella's giggles, Andrew's half-apologies, and Danielle's hesitant truths. So I said yes. That evening, I dressed with intention, not to impress, not to perform, but to claim space. A navy blue dress, Michael once called it my "don't mess with me" color, and a seashell necklace Sophie made strung with twine and glitter. When I opened the door, I was ready. Danielle stood on the steps, holding a tray of sweet tea like a peace offering. Behind her, Andrew balanced 2 trays of food. Ella waved shyly, and Sophie ran ahead to hug me tight around the waist. "We brought too much," Danielle admitted. "Old habits." "I kept the table long for a reason," I replied. Inside, we didn't sit at opposite ends. We sat beside one another, elbows brushing, stories overlapping. Sophie and Ella recited a poem they wrote together. Danielle told a terrible joke and laughed harder than anyone. Andrew carved the roast like he was auditioning for a cooking show. No one mentioned the lawsuit. No one brought up the years of missed birthdays or passive-aggressive silence. Instead, we talked about music, about porch repairs, about how the shutters needed repainting, and this time maybe they'd ask me first. When dessert came, Sophie stood and tapped her glass like a little MC. "Grandma," she said, "I know this was your house first, but I hope you know it's still yours, always." I looked around the room, at faces once turned away, now turned toward, at walls once echoing with absence, now warmed by presence. And I realized something. I hadn't come back to reclaim territory or to settle scores. I came back because this place remembered me, even when they didn't. Because I still had roots here. Because some stories deserve to be finished. Not rewritten, not erased, but finished. And I wasn't done writing. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Not out of habit or restlessness, but because something in me needed to mark this day differently. I slipped on Michael's old flannel shirt, the one I kept tucked behind the closet door, and made my way to the porch. The sea was calm, the tide gentle. I carried with me the last item from the attic box I hadn't touched until now, a sealed envelope marked in Michael's block letters, "For the day you forgive, even if you're not ready." I opened it with slow fingers, the paper softened by time. Inside was a single page. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means you stayed. Not just physically, but with your whole heart. I always knew you would. You've always had the kind of strength that doesn't shout, just endures. I don't know what version of family remains around you. I hope it's one that listens now. But even if it's not, I hope you finally see yourself the way I always did. Not as the quiet one, not as the helper, not as the one who gets left behind, but as the anchor. And if today still feels tender, that's okay. Sometimes forgiveness isn't a grand moment. It's a soft one, like this morning, like the ocean, like you, M. I sat with that letter for a long time, not crying, not hurting, just remembering. Then I stood and walked inside. On the kitchen counter, the folder labeled, "For When They Ask," still rested where I'd left it. I took it, carried it to the living room, and placed it in the center of the table. And then I wrote a new label on the front, "For When They Stay." That night, we had one last dinner before the girls returned to school. Ella drew a family crest with crayons. Sophie added a wind chime to the top. Danielle offered to repaint the shutters. "Any color you want," she said. "This time you choose." I looked around, felt the warmth in the walls, the echo of Michael's laughter lingering in the beams. "I think," I said softly, "we'll leave them just the way they are." Because some things, when mended with care, don't need to be changed. They just need to be seen. On Sunday afternoon, after everyone had left, the house stood in a rare stillness. Not empty, just resting. I walked through it slowly, letting my fingers graze the wood grain of door frames, pausing by the hallway mirror where Michael used to leave me notes in erasable marker. The last one I'd never erased was still faintly visible in the right light. "Don't disappear, Maggie. Not even from yourself." I smiled and whispered, "I'm still here." Being down in the office, I opened the bottom drawer and found the folder again, "For When They Stay." I added the photo Andrew had given me, now protected in a plastic sleeve. Next to it, I placed Sophie's painted shell, carefully wrapped in a napkin. Then, something in me stirred. A desire, not to hold on, but to pass on. So I grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and began writing, not to Andrew, not to Danielle, but to Sophie and Ella. My sweet girls, this house holds many stories, some hard, some healing, and one day you'll ask why some voices echo louder in the walls. When you do, I hope you also ask who kept the lights on, who swept the porch, who stayed. Don't be afraid of silence. But don't let it define you either. Speak, even when your voice shakes. And listen, especially when others don't know how to. This house is yours, not because of blood or signatures, but because you know how to make space. Real space. The kind where people don't have to shrink to belong. Be kind. Be curious. And if anyone ever tells you your presence is too much, remember, presence is power. With all my heart, Grandma Maggie, I sealed the letter, tucked it into the folder, and closed the drawer. Outside, the wind chime danced gently, not just with breeze, but with intention. I stepped onto the porch, looked out at the sea, and finally felt whole. The return had never been about revenge. It had always been about restoration, of memory, of space, of self. And I hadn't just reclaimed the house. I'd reclaimed my name. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I walked down to the water's edge barefoot. The sand, still warm from the sun, pressed gently into the soles of my feet, grounding me in the place I once feared I'd lost. The waves lapped at my ankles, not harsh, not rushed, just enough to remind me they were there, just enough to say, "You're still part of this." I stood there for a long while, not looking out to sea, but back at the house. It wasn't grand, not anymore. The paint peeled in spots, the porch steps creaked, and the garden still had more weeds than blooms. But it wasn't the structure that held value. It was the resilience stitched into every wall, the arguments and reconciliations, the absences and returns, the laughter and silence. They all lived here, and somehow they belonged together, not in harmony, but in truth. Behind me, I heard footsteps, soft, small. Sophie. "Grandma," she said, slipping her hand into mine, "do you ever miss what used to be?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "I don't miss what was. I'm grateful for what is." She nodded, her curls bouncing in the ocean breeze. "Can I come here when I'm older, with my kids?" "This house is yours as much as mine," I said, "and when they come, tell them the stories. All of them. Even the sad ones?" "Especially the sad ones," I smiled. "That's how we make room for joy." We walked back up the beach slowly, her hand still in mine. The sun slipped beneath the horizon, setting not just on a day, but on a chapter I hadn't realized was finally ending. Inside, I turned off the lights room by room, not in mourning, but in reverence. The house didn't need to be loud anymore. It didn't need to prove anything. It had been seen, it had been heard, and so had I. As the wind chimes sang its soft goodbye, I whispered one last line into the night air. I stayed. Not out of defiance, not for validation, but because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that never truly leave. They wait patiently to be told.